back to my channel. My name is Katie Knowful, and if you're new here, I make impractical crafts and lifestyle content. And this week, we are making a Baba Yaga clock because my toddler has been obsessed with clocks. So I'm super excited to combine kind of like the vintage idea of a cuckoo clock along with kind of the whimsical side of Baba Yaga. I am also trying out a brand new microphone, so I hope that my audio quality is doing better because it's been struggling a little bit, so hopefully it's doing so much better. Thank you so much for being here. I am super excited to hop right on into it because, to be honest, I started it before I did the intro and it has been looking so good, so let me just catch you up with where we are right now.
The very first thing I did in order to get my base set up was I took a birdhouse and I just did a paint wash. This is kind of like a cheater's way of staining it, where you take some paint and then you take some water so that it's super liquidy because wood is porous. And once you mix those two together, you can just do a very light coat onto the birdhouse, and this will make it so that it has the illusion of being stained. And of course, I had to employ some toddler help for this part as well. Going into this project, I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to make the shingles, and I ended up deciding to use some cardboard that I had in our apartment. And I did this just because I kind of wanted to use already what I had. I don't like spending a whole lot of money, and I had already spent money on quite a few things in this project. So cutting up the cardboard I had, and then at first I made them somewhat large, but I actually ended up deciding that I liked the smaller scale, so I ended up making them smaller as I went. The birdhouse ended up drying a little lighter than I wanted it to, so I went back in a second time with a darker water wash just to make it more of a dark wood. Originally, I was going to use super glue to glue on the shingles, but I ended up running out immediately, which then made me use hot glue, which if you've been here any amount of time, you would know that I'm not necessarily a big fan of hot glue, but this project has kind of changed my mind. I didn't even give myself a burn blister like I usually do. As I was doing the shingles, I decided that Baba Yaga deserves to have a second story room. So I went ahead and I made another room, and at first I tried cutting it and I felt like it was looking funny, so I ended up using literally just one of the edge of the dual box just to make that shape. As you can see, once again, I am having some toddler help, and I just hot glued it on. And once it had cooled down enough and I was able to look at it, I was just eyeballing the size of the roof for the little window. I decided that I didn't need to be too specific with it because I knew I was going to be shingling over it anyways, but there was really no rhyme or reason to doing it, and I'm sure that there is definitely a mathematical way that you can measure to know the angles to cut, but I decided not to do that, so I honestly just kind of winged it. But I mean, if Baba Yaga lives in a forest, then I don't really expect her house to be perfect, you know? I mean, it's on chicken legs. From there, I started shingling the sides and the roof, and honestly, turned out pretty good. It was very time consuming, I will say that. But in all, I think that the smaller shingles really made it. I think it was more to scale with the actual birdhouse, and overall, I am very happy with how they looked. I also decided to go ahead and make her a chimney, which I tried to do with cardboard, but it didn't end up working, so I switched to some tin foil so I could really crunch it against the angle of the roof to get that to fit the way that I wanted it to. I will say that this sounded terrible when I was editing, so be glad that we don't have to listen to that. But yeah, I ended up really liking tinfoil. At a local store we have here in town, they have these really impressive tinfoil sculptures, and my toxic trait is somehow being under the delusion that I could probably make that too. Although if you look at my technique that I'm doing for this, we can all agree more likely than not I cannot do a super good tinfoil statue. Continuing on with the shingles, this side ended up I think having mostly larger shingles than the other side, but honestly in the end it doesn't really matter all that much because they are a minor detail, and I ended up putting paint and moss on them, and altogether it just makes the house look really alive. Then I passed the reins over to Hens so that he could help me with the clock mechanism, And we ended up cutting a hole in the back in kind of an unusual way where we traced it with a knife, and then we used our drill to drill hundreds of little holes all the way around the outside so that we could get the back off. And from there we measured a hole in the front so that we knew where to drill it. And if we're being honest, this ended up being too low, just like my camera angle. The hole made it so that the hands did not move, and we ended up having to move it later. Somehow I don't have a video of it, but hence also made the chicken legs for me. So I took some air dry clay that I got in the color terracotta because I felt like it would be very useful in future projects in this color, so that I could cover the tinfoil just to make it a little bit thicker so that when I painted it, it looked okay. And honestly, I have mixed feelings about air dry clay. You'll see later, but I did a bunch of thin little sheets and then blended them together. And honestly, as it dried, those sheets that I put together did end up breaking. So the feet themselves have a bunch of cracks, which you'll see in a little bit. So maybe this was not the way to go, but I was really sick of the oven baked clay because I'm never sure when it's done. And then just using some tinfoil, I made two little balls to kind of like make the little chicken thigh part, so that the bottom of the house had little chicken thighs. I ended up going with this really bright orange for the roof initially, and I did do a paint wash over it later to dull it down, although in some ways I wish I had just done multiple layers of this orange and kept it almost like that cartoony look, like the cutesy cartoony look. But at the time, not what I had in mind. So I went through, and cardboard is very, very porous, and so it took quite a lot of paint layers for it to actually saturate. I also ended up making two more roof pieces that I would consider them almost popsicle shaped, and that was just to cover up this wooden part up here to keep it all uniform. And honestly, I thought it really brought the look completely together so that there wasn't just this random piece of wood at the top of her roof. Then I decided to take a few more colors, namely this purple, kind of the sage, and this terracotta color, and I decided to brush them onto the shingles in different spots just to give it a little bit more depth for when I did put the paint wash over it. And honestly, I'm not sure how I feel about this. It ended up all pulling through together in the end, but this orange, I really like it now, guys. I don't know, you'll have to tell me later what you think. Then it's finally time for some of the fun parts of this project, namely this upstairs window where I debated a lot with what I wanted to do with it. Ultimately, I ended up deciding to go ahead and just cut it out and give it that three-dimensional look. So I traced out the angles for which I wanted the window to shape, and I followed kind of the trapezoid shape of the original doll box. Like, this is one of those flaps that goes on the inside. And I tried to give myself a thick enough windowsill so that I could paint it, because I did have like a storybook Russian look that I was going for with the trim. And so with that in mind, I traced it all out. Hence, Owen had gone on a quest earlier in the day to find me some sticks, so I spent a little bit of time figuring out where I wanted to put them because I did want to incorporate them into my house. And I kind of got a rough idea of where I was planning on putting them. Unfortunately, because we did get them outside and not in a craft store or anything, they are stick shaped and not flat, so they were kind of hard to work with. But I did find a way to incorporate them. And then I kind of scarily, now looking at this footage, cut out the cardboard so that I could have the three-dimensional window that I really wanted. Then I was able to measure out a stick and decided that I wanted it to go on the inside to act as the window panes in a house. And honestly, I could just break them and hot glue them in. So I have this one up here that went in straight up and down, and I did end up hot gluing these so that I could put them in a cross shape. If you have been here any amount of time, you would know that I like impractical details, so I went ahead and I added some glow-in-the-dark paint so that at night it would look like the lights were on. And I took some lace that I had literally laying around in my apartment, and I decided to cut it and dye it, quote-unquote, with some paint so that I could hang it up in the house. I ended up picking kind of a brown color because Baba Yaga did not strike me as someone who would have white lace curtains, but maybe brown ones. So once that was done and cut, I was able to hot glue it into the top of the window. Okay, let's be honest, I don't know why I did it this way. For some reason, I decided to put the stick in the very first thing that I did without doing anything else. And then after that, I put in the curtains. And then when I was all done with all of that, I went through and I painted the inside of the roof. So I don't have a good explanation as to why I did it this way. In retrospect, I should have done it the opposite way. So I should have painted and then put in the curtain and then as a finishing touch put in the stick. So it was definitely kind of sloppy, and also, complete side note, it really doesn't work. It was a fun idea, and in theory, if I had it somewhere else, it would work, but because of where I hung it up in our apartment, it doesn't get any sunlight in there, and so it doesn't ever glow. So, good idea in theory, poor execution on my part. I was going back and forth for a while on how I wanted this to kind of all come together, and I ended up deciding to paint the outside of the window frame this terracotta color because it kind of reminded me of Slavic folk art, and I think it ended up looking pretty good, especially with all of the green that comes in later. I then decided to try painting the fireplace just directly onto the tinfoil, and that really didn't work, so I ended up having to put on a layer of the air dry clay, which was fine, but it did just add a little bit more time to my project. I continued to add in the red details just on the trim, and as well as making a supporting beam down in the bottom just kind of to make it look like it had that fairy tale vibe, which you know I strive for on this channel. And this is when all of the fun details started coming together. So not only did I do a supporting beam there as well, which once again, not really scientifically figuring it out, just cutting it and seeing if it would fit, I also added in some pieces of sticks up at the top of the rafters for the window just to make it have like a little more what would be support if it were a real house. And then I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do the front door. You can see here that I'm kind of cutting it because I wanted to have it be three-dimensional, but then I remembered that I am putting a clock face over it, so I ended up scrapping this idea. If I hadn't put a clock face on the front, then I would have done a three-dimensional door, but that just was not in the cards for this project due to what I was originally planning on. So I just went through and I painted the door. In retrospect, maybe I would have done this a little bit different. I'm not sure I really like the red for the door itself, and I think maybe in the stories there's an eye that looks out of the door. But just due to the nature of the project, I had to keep the door pretty simple so that I could put the clock face where it was supposed to go. Not that you can tell, but after a camping trip and a trip to the urgent care that's down our street, I finally got back to doing this project. And I decided to paint some red beams at all four corners of the house. Again, I think maybe I would have liked this if this were three-dimensional, but at the time I was not sure how big the clock hands were going to be to go around, and so I didn't want to risk them hitting either of the two sides of the house, and I didn't really want one side to be three-dimensional, meaning like the sides of the house, but having the face of the house being 2D, so I went ahead and I did all the sides two-dimensional just with some paint. I also went through and I painted the chimney, which I did not manage to film myself putting the little roof on. It's a piece of tin foil with 4 sticks that I broke so that it kind of had the vintage chimney look, and I really liked it. And also the fact that the air dry clay did crack while it was drying kind of helped the look for the chimney part, so I was not mad about that. Since my original inspiration for this project were cuckoo clocks, we bought these little birds, and now I have 5 that I have for future projects. And I just went ahead and first I was trying to figure out how to get it into the clock itself, and I ended up hot gluing it to the mechanism for the clock. So there's that. But I did paint it black so that it would look more like a crow and not like a cute little yellow bird, because Baba Yaga is supposed to have a crow. Then taking some of these little white picket fences that I had bought from the craft store, I decided that I would paint the brown, and also I wanted the entirety of the front of the lawn for the house to be green. And if you've been here any amount of time, you would know that I am allergic to fake plants, so we went with some preserved moss, and honestly, I am obsessed. I will be using this for everything in the future. I love the fact that I can have the green and not break out into hives. Then I finally glued the bird into place because he had completely dried, and I started painting the feet of the house yellow. And let me tell you, I really liked how it turned out. Originally, I was going to do a darker wash over them with brown, but I decided to keep them that storybook look for the house itself. And I really think it looked really great with how the green moss came out, because the moss is so green that just having it be so yellow and so green and then the house on top, I think looks really good. It looks like the house would be able to bend down and have the feet blend into the moss of the forest around it, and I really like that. Then I connected them to the bottom. Ignore how messy my table is, at least you don't have to live here, and I apologize to hens. But then I went through and I just added moss all the way around so that we hid all the rest of the wood, and honestly, I think it looks so good. And I also did not record it very well, apparently, but I also added some moss to some places up on the roof, and with that takes us to the reveal.
Here it is. Okay, couple notes. Number one, I am pretty happy with how it came out. I think it looks pretty similar to kind of the cuckoo clocks I was envisioning. Unfortunately, I couldn't do as many 3D details on the front as I'd originally wanted to because of the nature of this face, of the clock face. And honestly, this birdhouse in thickness for this clock, it's too thick. So actually, this hour hand just kind of like is loosey-goosey. So, can it actually read time? No, not really, which is unfortunate, but there's not really a whole lot I could do about that unless I wanted to take the clock face off and find a new clock to put it onto. And then a couple of other notes is this air dry clay that I got, I thought was pretty easy to work with, but what I didn't realize is when it dries, every single piece that you put together, even though I smoothed it out with water, does end up coming apart, and so you can see some of the tinfoil under there. And then also this paint that I chose is pretty, but it does not show up very well on the house. So just like a couple of things that I wanted to mention there. The glow in the dark paint I think is really cool. Where it is, it will not be getting a whole lot of light, so it won't really be activating that air dry paint a whole lot anyways. And then this moss, which I have been told lots of people hate, I love it. I am allergic to fake plants, so the fact that I can touch preserved moss and still get that greenery effect that I love on things is super exciting to me, so I'm super happy there. And also, finally did a project where I didn't absolutely hate using a hot glue gun, so we are character growing. But yeah, here's the final product. Trying to get a thumbnail. I really liked adding all of the green little places. And then originally I thought about painting Baba Yaga's chicken legs a little darker, but I ended up liking like the yellow contrast where the house looks old, but the chicken is still young. But yeah, let me go hang it back up. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope my audio is doing better because like I said, I do have a new microphone. And I'm sorry that this video ended up going up so late. I've had a lot of medical stuff come up recently, so I have been pretty just generally anxious about everything, and so that made it kind of hard for me to get this video done, but I'm very happy to finally show off my clock that I made. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I will be seeing you in my next video. Doodles!